Great, well, welcome. It seems like it's been an interesting day for everybody so far. We're going to pick that up right here, talk about solar, talk about storage, what people are doing, some of the strategies around that, and we have a really good panel to talk about it. It's a big topic, so we're going to cover in front of the meter, behind the meter, utility scale, commercial scale, what Rocky Mountain Institute called in an article this week, the relentless pace of energy transition. And we have some instigators of positive change here with us today. The way that I was hoping we would do this is just go right down the line. People can introduce themselves very, very briefly, if you could, please. Their full bios are in there if you'd like to read them. We're going to talk with each person individually and take questions as they come. I'm going to try my best to keep things moving because I think you guys probably have some better questions than I have prepared. So maybe we can just do Sarah, Denny, Martin right down the line. If you guys could introduce yourselves, please.
I'm Sarah Neff. I'm the Senior Vice President of Sustainability for Kilroy Realty. And in that capacity, I do our solar and storage work and other energy procurement. So we have, relevant to this discussion, finishing up construction on 5.2 megawatts of solar, and then two separate portfolios of battery projects, one with STEM and one with AMS. Going into my portfolio, we're in pre-construction now, so deals are inked, and we're, siting utility lines and all that sort of fun in the weeds stuff. So that's me.
Hi, Denny McGinn. I'm here as a board member of Customer First Renewables, based in Gaithersburg, Maryland, north of Washington, D.C. And we do large-scale renewable energy projects in a strategic advisory sense for a whole variety of customers. We've done universities, including 3 universities here in the southern part of the state. Back east, MIT, George Washington American University, Arizona State, and the state a little bit to the east of California. And the whole proposition is to take a look at an entire energy portfolio of a company or a university or a city and say, all right, here's how much you have in terms of grid power. Here's what you're doing with thermal. Here's what you're doing with demand response, the whole portfolio. And then through a very rigorous analytical process, helping the client decide how much renewable energy that they might want and why they would want it. Usually, many of our clients start out saying, well, we want to reduce greenhouse gases. And we go, great. How about saving money? Yeah, we like that too. And how about hedging against future fossil fuel volatility? Yep, that's good. And oh, by the way, what about the branding aspects? What about your ability to attract a workforce of millennials, for example, that really get it and understand sustainability and want to work for a company and customer base that wants to transact with a company that gets it by, hey, they're doing more and more renewable energy. So it's exciting times. I do a lot of other things. I guess I'm a sustainability provocateur as the best description, but it's just really wonderful to be here. And David, you've done it again.
And Commissioner Peterman, I said that you would be here on time, so you were right on time. We appreciate that very much.
So it happens when you get back-to-back panels, which is the wonderful experience of Verde Exchange. So many different forms to experience, so thank you all for joining us today. I'm Commissioner Carla Peterman with the California Public Utilities Commission. We are the regulator of the electric utilities and approve their power procurement. Personally, I've been very involved with our work on energy storage and renewables procurement, and looking forward to talking about the opportunities of storage plus solar today.
My name is Martin Herman. I'm CEO of 8 Minute Energy. I'm proud to say that the first 5 minutes of every hour in summer, that's the power coming from our 3 power plants with solar in Mojave Desert. We're working on the other 55 minutes. So 8 Minute Energy is a California-based company. We have offices here on Wilshire Boulevard, in San Francisco, Sacramento, El Centro, Houston, and other places. We're exclusively solar and storage. We started in California, have about 12% of the market share for utility scale solar in California. That's kind of from the first market window, 2009 to 2015. And since then, we started large new portfolios, among them one of the largest in Texas, with a loan of 5 gigawatts that are geared towards COD in 2019 to 2021, 2022. And also excited to be here. Thanks for the invitation, and looking forward to discussing solar storage and peakers.
Perfect. So, Martin, we're going to start with you, actually. And I wanted to, if you could, just to help us set the stage. We've read about TEP, the PPA that they signed, I believe it was May of last year or March of last year. Significantly less than $45 a megawatt hour was what the press said. Xcel Energy recently signed a PPA, median price $36 per megawatt hour. And that those are both solar plus storage, as I understand them. Can you help us just put that in context, compare that to a natural gas peaker? How big is the delta? How attractive are those numbers?
I think the PV and storage certainly has a very attractive value proposition. With the public data points, we always need to be careful. Tucson was a 30% storage. And with Xcel, we don't know what the storage percentage was. Our guess is it's probably also 30% or less. If you add more percentage capacity, then obviously the price goes up. But if you look at, there are different levels. So if you start with a peaker, a new peaker, you're somewhere between $150 to $210 per megawatt hour. So if you want to replace it with, say, a PV plant with 50% 4-hour battery, then you are competitive in most parts of the United States. If you go after, that's a new one. If you use an existing an existing peaker plant and just use the variable cost, in the summer spots of the United States, you're still competitive. And the really exciting thing is that the same is true for a new combined cycle. We as an industry can beat the combined cycle of a new power plant already. Now, these are all price points around 2019, 2020, but as we know, if we have experience as an industry, technology doesn't stop there. We can see a path to beating even existing combined cycle, and the same is true for coal. So if you're an investor in natural gas, I've been saying for years now that natural gas is dead man walking, so I would advise you to look at it very carefully whether you want to be an investor in that fuel.
So that was one of my follow-up questions. You said these are 2019, 2020 prices. So this is not 5 years out based on a forward price curve that somebody's modeled and we're all crossing our fingers we're going to get there. These are people bidding things that are really coming online very shortly?
Absolutely. If you look at the current bidding horizon of PV, which is in that time frame, and you compare that with the variable costs of peaker, then you absolutely can beat them in the sunnier places of the United States. If the most disadvantaged places when it comes to solar radiation, we still are out there, but a vast majority of, like, the Southwest for sure, sunnier regions of Texas, some places of the Southeast, you can beat that value proposition.
So then what objections are you hearing? It seems fairly obvious what the price consideration is. Why are not more utilities doing this? What issues are we not talking about?
Well, we have to consider these are relatively new developments. On the other side, utilities are all about reliability and keeping the lights on. So any change in their system, you meet with some inertia in the operating rooms, and rightfully so. But utilities are extremely curious. We have a team that is able to dollarize every single benefit of a battery over the lifetime over the economic lifetime. And in those discussions, we experience the curiousness of the utilities. And as we get deeper in the dialogue, they're getting more and more excited because they see the benefit of a battery, which has much more than just load shifting or frequency regulation.
Okay, so let's stick with inertia and move over to Commissioner Peterman, if we could. So what? Somebody that can help with that inertia and push that inertia, obviously, how are you seeing utilities think about and come to this decision? The price appears to be there, but what is the holdup? Why is this not the go-to rather than the alternative?
Well, one interesting thing I'll point out is the activity in this area isn't happening with the California investor-owned utilities. We've not had any of our utilities execute a contract for a solar plus storage project. And that's largely attributable to the fact of the utilities' over procurement as it relates to renewable portfolio standard. Southern California Edison was the last utility to do an RPS solicitation, and that was back in 2016. And it was earlier for PG&E and San Diego Gas and Electric. And so following up on Martin's point, it's only been the last couple of years is that we've seen this kind of true economic opportunity. And so we've not seen a procurement situation for the utilities to take advantage of that. But they have been investing in energy storage. And as we go forward, I can see opportunities for this type of project to come forward. We have, I was mentioning earlier, we're in the process of doing integrated resource planning, and the analysis that our commission has done in terms of what resources are going to be needed to meet our greenhouse gas goals as an electric sector in 2030 will require about, they've modeled 10,200 megawatts of renewable power and about 2,000 megawatts of energy storage. And so the optimization and modeling has all these resources in there. Now, they're not necessarily deploying them together, but you could see some possibility for that. So the investor-owned utilities will be filing their own integrated resource plans with their optimal portfolio for their system later this year. And so it'll be interesting to see if there's some discussion about these products coming together. So in terms of barriers, as it goes, you sometimes don't address the barriers until you have a project knocking at your door. But one of the barriers that I have heard is some challenges around interconnection. So currently in the California system, if you're in the interconnection queue for your solar project and you want to add storage to it, you have to go and start the interconnection process again. So I think that kind of savvy developers are thinking about how to go into the queue for both of these things at the same time. So that might be an issue we need to work through. And then I'll just wrap up with the fact that even though we're not seeing projects come forward at the utility scale that are combination, we are seeing a lot of activity in behind-the-meter customer side solar paired with energy storage. And changes to our net energy metering tariffs as well as our incentives programs, I think, are facilitating that adoption.
Excellent. And a couple follow-up questions, and that's a good lead into Sarah, but a couple other questions for you here before we move on. So I recall maybe it was 2006 or 7, I think Edison came out with their utility-owned generation case, and it was maybe originally 100 megawatts they want to do solar, and then it got upsized, and there was sort of a settlement with the industry, and it ended up being half utility-owned, half independently owned. Is storage being owned by a utility meeting the same arguments, having the same discussion? Is the industry as anxious as they were about the utilities owning solar?
I don't think so for a couple of reasons. One, with energy storage, we've always seen that there are use cases where it might make sense for the utility to have ownership and control, for example, applications at the distribution level. And in terms of motivating the utilities to invest in this area and take seriously the opportunities for storage, with our storage framework, we allow the utilities to own up to 50% of the storage wherever it is on the system. That could include behind the meter. Now, it's provocative, and they haven't pursued that opportunity, but we figured as we're figuring out what works, we might as well explore different business models as well. But also, this is just my opinion, one of the reasons I think you also don't see third parties as concerned about utility ownership in this area is that it didn't work out very well for them in solar. So we had a utility solar program, utility-owned distributed generation, and their costs were more expensive than third parties. They weren't able to get the projects done at the scale and time. So the utilities all petitioned us to actually stop that program and allow transitions of those target megawatts to a program called RAM, which solicits projects from a broader audience. And so we actually had to force them to build more. So I think the concern, as always, is with the utility engagement is there some exercise of that monopoly power that will harm competitive opportunities? But we're learning that even the power of the utility sometimes isn't a match for companies that are focused and more nimble. And so I think there's space for everyone.
And lastly, this is obviously a very California.
The
We're coming back to you. I know this is a California-focused audience, but outside of California, I'm sure you speak with your peers in the industry. How well received is storage outside of California in Texas, in Jersey, places like that?
Very much so. I was at a national storage forum recently, and was dismayed because all the examples that people had were not California. And I thought, wait, when did Massachusetts do that? Well, Indiana's doing that. And so I think it's a real testament now that you can talk about innovative storage projects. You can look at what's happening, for example, in Hawaii with storage and solar, and California doesn't even have to come up. So there's a lot of excitement, and it's for different reasons. The timing for storage right now is really great from a public policy perspective, because a lot of states are thinking about how do you have a resilient grid, how do you have more resource efficiency, and storage is just one of those tools in the toolkit that help to address all of those problems. I think there continues to be a discussion about to what extent that these are assets that should be rate-based and kind of what that means for the utility business model of the future. But I've heard a general acceptance of the resource of this asset and a requirement that it goes into the planning, which is a good thing.
Great. So, Denny, we're going to skip you for a moment and talk with Sarah. Sarah, you guys have signed up 2 large multi-site projects on the client side of the meter. We've been talking about the utility side of the meter. Can you tell us about those projects, how they're structured? They're pretty interesting. I've done that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that sort of makes we real estate people just don't want to talk about demand charges, and we just get very sad when things get complicated. What we like is money, and what we like is rent. That is the language we speak. Now you have my interest. Now I'm not sad anymore. So the way that my battery deals are structured, and this is how we structured my solar deal similarly, is that we have, the battery will do its little battery arbitrage that it's supposed to do, right? It will charge up at night when power is cheaper, and it will, discharge during the day when power is more expensive, and there'll be some operational savings. But I am just giving that on back to the battery companies. Those benefits would otherwise accrue to my tenant. Not that I don't like my tenants. Not that I don't spend every waking hour basically trying to reduce OpEx for my tenants. But my experience with trying to get these projects across the finish line internally is that there's a difference between a lighting retrofit and a battery. There's a difference between, a little, like, put a VFD on your HVAC and a solar panel. It's a much longer term commitment. I have to shut my building down. It's a lot. And I was having issues getting it over the hurdle on operational savings. There's other companies that have been fine on operational savings. Irvine Company, for example, they're OpEx only. Great. But that I couldn't make it happen internally at Kilroy. And so what we did was we're zeroing out those savings, and then we wrote a lease, and we're just taking a rent payment, and like a real good old smells nice in the morning rent payment from our battery companies. Same with our solar. And that is really what, helped me get it over the finish line. I mean, one of the sort of funny things, I know real estate isn't alone on this, but there's times where it's the exact same numbers that you're talking about, just hacked in different ways. And so for some reason, the idea of just rent, cap it, add it, and then what is increased value at sale, all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, now I do want to talk to you about your project. You're like, it's the same numbers. It's the exact same numbers I was talking about previously. I just divided it by an interest rate, and all of a sudden everybody's excited. And so I think the important thing for storage companies and for anybody in this space is the need to be nimble and know your audience. Some audiences are going to love talking about operational savings. Some audiences just want to talk about carbon differences between power at night and power during the day. Some can't talk about any of that, but they just really want to talk about rent. And I think it's really important to have flexibility in financial structures. It's hard. Financing parties wig out about this kind of thing. But I think unless there's flexibility in the market to how you structure these things, it's going to be really hard to get a lot of adoption.
And it's still a new market,
Yeah.
for sure. So people that are listening that are thinking about this on their property or their properties, what would you tell them? Is this, I think Mr. Wesley said it was going to be ubiquitous in the very near term. Would you tell them to hang on and wait until that's the case, or should they start now?
So it's this funny thing where it's this hurry up and wait scenario where, as we saw from our friends from Bloomberg yesterday, battery prices are getting precipitously cheaper. Is that right? I'm sorry, we're after lunch. But they're getting cheaper very quickly. The price of batteries has fallen 24% in the last year, like 80-some% in the last 7 years. So on the one hand, it's like, why are we hurrying up? Let's hang out for a while. On the other hand, incentives are great right now. And so it's this important thing where you lock in your incentives immediately, and then sort of play a little bit of chicken with your deadlines and actually getting the stuff installed. And so, I mean, as a real estate owner, like, I don't care how much it costs you to build it. I'm not putting any money in. And so I get annoyed with that because I want things to be built right now. I want my rent. So it's some negotiating. But it seems like it's get your contract done, and then you have a very, relaxed construction timeline seems to be the way that the market is working.
Oh, that makes me sad.
Sorry.
I don't want to.
I wanted it to be faster. I negotiated it from 2 years from the date of execution to 18 months, and I was proud of myself. Anyway.
We're working to improve that as an industry, I'm sure. Denny, so before I get into your questions, I have to apologize. I was writing these down earlier, and there's so many references to ships and navigation and turning a ship. It's not on purpose, I promise you. But you were former Assistant Secretary of the Navy, so you've got experience, big organizations, change in big organizations. And I'm curious, as a board member now at Customer First Renewables, what advice you're giving that company about how to talk with these large organizations for what is a very big change in that mindset.
The main thing is what is the value? Everybody tends to focus on costs, using various metrics of cost, rent, et cetera. But when you start talking about value, you can put a context on cost that is very, very important. So what kind of value are people interested in? Who doesn't like increased energy security or reliability? Who doesn't like saving money, not just next quarter or next year, but over the life of a project? Who doesn't like improving the environmental footprint, whether it's global in terms of greenhouse gases or local or regional pollution as well? So there's a lot of, I would say, triple bottom line to looking at things like, and it isn't isolated, as Carla said, just solar plus storage. It's a whole variety of ways of getting cleaner and more sustainable and distributed energy that provides value to a whole variety of missions and enterprises. That was the case in the Department of Defense, remains the case, and I think that the attractiveness is going to continue, the value is going to continue, even as the cost of doing these things is going to come down.
And I have to imagine that conversation is getting easier, right? I mean, you've had these conversations with large organizations. You can
Right.
start to point to people and brands and say, they've done it, they've done it, they've done
Right.
it. At some point, that flywheel starts going.
You bet, yeah.
Are we there yet?
No, not, but we're getting there. I'll give you an example. One of our clients, Corning Glass. Corning makes Gorilla Glass for Apple. And Apple, as you probably know, has been really doing a great job in greening up, if you will, their supply chain. So we're able to put together a large-scale renewable energy project, not as a developer, but as a strategic advisor to Corning, just as we do our other clients. And they made some really good choices. It was some on-site, much of it off-site because it is large-scale. But the amount of greenhouse gas to produce X amount of Gorilla Glass just starts going really, really down. And that is very attractive to all of the large companies like the Apples, Amazons, Microsofts of the world as a real value.
Excellent. So I've got a few questions I'm going to start posing to the panel, but if anybody in the audience has questions, you can raise your hand now. When I'm done, I'm going to keep firing away questions. I think this is a great opportunity for everybody here. And it's a big topic, as you can start to understand. Utility side of the meter, client side of the meter, regulatory finance. There's a lot going on. Sarah's got a very simple view. She just wants rent. So we're trying to deliver that here. I think the first most obvious question, as I think about the topic, is the impact of the new administration. And you can take that question about the Section 201 trade case. You can take that question about any federal policies, about some of the uncertainty that looms over both solar and storage now. And Martin, maybe I'll pick on you first, if that's okay.
Sure. Clearly, a tariff never helps us as an industry. In addition, we have the experience from 2012 and 2014 where tariffs were imposed, and none of them created any manufacturing jobs, and they're slowing us down. At the same time, we, as an industry, have learned to live with them. We, as an industry, were successful nevertheless, and I think that we continue to drive both solar and storage despite the tariffs. I think the technology development is also a bigger topic. If you look at markets like China or India that have, that they just need, they're energy deprived and they need more energy as opposed to having a more environmental motivation, they buy more solar than fossil fuels, and they buy it just because they look at the value proposition. And I think we just have to look at the fundamentals and recognize even with a tariff, this is something that the utilities are interested in, and for a good reason.
So I had a boss a few years ago that used to say, if somebody tells you have potential, it means that they're saying that you haven't done anything yet. But I got to think there's some potential for good out of this administration.
I mean,
Is there any optimism?
Look, this was not what I put on my sign at the march, but like it's been annoying, right? Like it's been frustrating. I have we're developers as well as owners. And I have some development projects with really attractive solar, and the solar developer that I've been working with won't partner with me on them because it's too far away and it's too risky because of price. It's one thing if, we are working together on a development project, but it's getting delivered this year, so fine. I mean, they'd even probably stomach it for next year, but these are buildings that will be delivered in 2020 and 2021, and I would really love them to pay for the infrastructure to, it's easier than a retrofit, right, to get it in from the beginning correctly as opposed to trying to rip up parking spaces later, but I can't make it happen because of the tariff. So, the sign is like, this tariff is really irritating. It doesn't make compelling March stuff, but I'm having to really rethink the way that I'm going to do the solar anyway, and I'm going to have to be innovative. So congrats. But yes, we're spurring innovation, but it's making it harder, right? So I'm probably going to have to finance it myself. I'm going to have to go convince Kilroy that they should just let me build it and that I'll be able to sell it later. I'm going to have to make up a number for that, which I'm going to hope to be able to stick in a pro forma somewhere so somebody actually gives me an extra $1.5 million to add to the construction cost. It's unpleasant. I don't want to do it. I mean, in some ways, for development, it's a little bit easier because nobody likes adding the dependencies of oh my God, I have to shade 50% of this parking lot, and if the solar people don't show up, then I can't operate my building when I want to. So in some ways, it's nicer to just have it be clean and all one GC and one contract, but it's more expensive that way. So it's causing me problems. I'll get through it, but it's certainly, it's delaying the pace of progress for me.
Danny, please.
Newtonian physics, one of the laws for reaction is an equal and opposite reaction. And since the White House announcement about pulling out of the Paris Accord, we've seen our business go up. And I'm not talking a little bit, going up significantly, where companies and universities are saying, hey, if they don't like it, that means I like it more, and give me some of that stuff, and it really it has awakened people. Just the tremendous example that Governor Brown and the entire public and private sectors in California, along with other states, have risen to the occasion. I'm on the board of the Rocky Mountain Institute. We had a report from one of our folks in Bonn at COP, and the largest pavilion in Bonn was the U.S. pavilion, and this is after the U.S. government supposedly has pulled out of the agreement. It just is really good to see the kind of balance or rebalancing that can happen. And it just kind of proves that we don't have a dictatorship. We've got a system of government and a society that can in fact march and rise to the occasion and continue progress. A little harder sometimes, but still progress forward.
And I think perhaps that's the silver lining here, right? Is if you can make it through this, you can make it through darn near anything.
Sure.
They call it the solar coaster. People in the room have probably heard that joke. I don't know if anybody's yet christened the storage something, but we need one. Anybody's got one?
And I wanted to add too that, of course, we're concerned about anything that might add cost to ratepayers. California in 2016, 75% of the new additions to the grid were solar, and the rest were gas. But that being said, I'm not that concerned about the tariffs because everyone's aware of them and one can plan for it and organize around it. What I find more important to watch happening at the federal level are the discussions that are happening around resiliency and reliability. Many states and stakeholders in this room responded to their DOE order to FERC to look at the issue of reliability. Although FERC did not go in that direction, they did open a NOPR that asked a broad enough range of questions that they could develop a record to get to that exact same conclusion. And I think many of the initiatives that happen at the federal level, you can critique first order because of process. But as the administration becomes more comfortable in its role and they start to follow the process, you can go through a very fair process and have a unfavorable outcome. And so when it comes to issues around reliability, I think that's going to be the target on renewables now, not so much cost or whether they can function, but whether the grid can. And everyone's situation is different. So we've learned how to balance this in California, but it is a full-time job for many people, and not every state has the same resource mix or the same markets, so it's a little harder to export some of our best practices to other states, and therefore think about what a national solution to those issues might be.
Yes, please.
That's a very good example of where you open the door and you can either go someplace very good or very bad. And there are a lot of us who are very excited about that resiliency docket, but you're right to identify where things could go wrong. We've talked a lot about some of the cool things that storage can do from one perspective, but where do you see things going wrong? What could be bad that's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years? And what's the role of the regulators to ensure we get to the positive outcomes we're excited about?
Well, I am happy to say I do think about what could go wrong, and so far in my inquiries, I have been cautiously assuaged about some of the concerns I have. So, what you get concerned about anytime you're incentivizing new technologies are one, safety. Can this perform safely? There were some situations with fires associated with storage facilities in the early days. And so in terms of regulatory process, we just made that an issue front and center in one of our rulemakings, and we now have a storage checklist in terms of storage requirements safety requirements that need to go into contracts. We've also participated as part of federal conversations on that issue. The other topic I've been particularly interested in recently are life cycle environmental impacts of lithium-ion batteries. If we are successful, we're going to have a whole lot of batteries. And this is an issue that I'm still looking into, but I'm currently cautiously optimistic for a couple of reasons. One, from what I understand from those who are using these batteries, they don't have particularly dangerous chemicals or dangerous metals that you have to worry about. And so the issue around battery recycling is about some of the economic opportunities that might come from that and the opportunity to use the elements of these batteries for new batteries. You're seeing Tesla do this at this gigafactory. So that actually could be an economic opportunity even for California to go into that space. But those are the types of issues that you have to think about at scale. But if everyone has one of these, what does the supply chain look like? Does it expose us to new geopolitical risk? And also say, finally, on batteries, a tremendous amount of fascinating research is happening for those metals that are a little more precious, like cobalt, and maybe come from countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has some geopolitical challenges. We're looking at some substitutes. And this is another area we have to watch what the federal government's doing, because there was a significant amount of research happening on energy. Now, not as much as would make sense for a country that's trying to do a transition, but still there were some. And so looking to see how the direction to the national labs is changing, who might be moving away from this work. Because right now, people do have their eye on the ball on these issues, but I don't know if that's going to be the case in the years to come.
I think would add that there's a tremendous amount of research, as Carla said, going on. And I think we'd make a mistake as we build the microgrids and distributed grids of the future distributed energy resources if we confined our thoughts to what's available right now or in the next couple of years. There's a company in Massachusetts called Ionic Materials. Bill Joy is one of the members of the board that promises to reduce the cost of delivered power from batteries by an order of magnitude or greater. And is it going to happen tomorrow? No, but it will happen. Just think about our own experience and how we deliver content to ourselves, information, entertainment, whatever. And you go back simply 5 years, and it's completely different. The format is different. The delivery mechanism is different. The volume and choices are unbelievable. So I think that storage plus solar, storage plus whatever form of energy that you have is going to be revolutionized. And the demand for more and more electricity, we've been pretty flat for a long time, especially in California. But when we see this electric transportation revolution taking place before our eyes, witness the announcement by the governor on last Friday, wow, it's going to just create unbelievable opportunities that are embedded in the challenges.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Sarah, go
I
ahead.
was just say, in terms of challenges, and I don't want to seem like some sort of like histrionic actress of like, no one understands me, but people still don't understand that batteries go next to buildings, except for utility scale, and people don't seem to be any more sort of clued in I don't want to knock on my battery providers, you guys are great, but overall in the industry about actually how real estate functions, those who own and operate buildings. So for example, I was on a panel about batteries last year at a conference, and I won't call her out, the woman moderating the panel was like the global expert in storage. She's been doing this for a decade. And our event company and I were in the panel, and afterwards she turns to us and goes, guys, I think you're the first customers I've ever talked to. And we were like, huh, boy, that seems like a problem. And things come up, like, for whatever reason, the way that the S-chip money fell out, I have a campus that's going to get 3 large exterior batteries. And for the way, somehow, 2 of them, they're all supposed to be Tesla, and then 2 of them were Tesla, and then one of them happened to end up as like LG. And I was like, no. And then the battery company was like, no, it's fine. It's the same capacity. And I was like, no. Because then the tenant in the building with the LGs, I'm like, why didn't I get the Tesla battery? And then they're going to be all pissed. And I was like, it wasn't until I literally was ready to just back out of the deal that they were like, oh, magically, now we have the incentives for a 3rd Tesla battery. But like the idea that would be important, like the batteries, like people are like, but it's the same capacity. Like, what do you care? And you're like, because aesthetics are important to me. So I'm concerned that adoption isn't going to be faster until, it's just like why I keep hiring Drew for everything is because like nobody gets real estate. Drew gets real estate because Drew worked in real estate. And I think really bridging that communication gap is deeply necessary to get adoption going faster.
And I think the point you make there is that there is a gap between economically incentivized and ubiquitous, and that gap is filled with a bunch of little decisions and pitfalls. Yeah. And the industry is young, but it's moving quick. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm John White from CERT, and I wanted to ask the panel to think about the other technologies and the other applications. California's always been very focused on sometimes one thing at a time to the exclusion of everything else. So we focus a lot on solar, now we're focusing on batteries. But there's other technologies like large-scale storage, both existing and new, pumped hydro. There's solar thermal with storage. In Europe, they're using, in Japan, they're looking at seasonal storage with hydrogen as opposed to daily storage. And I'm just wondering, how do we get a balanced portfolio of technologies that can help support the massive amount of storage that it would seem California is going to need in the future, given where we're headed and how valuable the storage will be to the grid operations?
So you're talking about a basket of storage technologies?
Well, and they're different. They have different
Right.
attributes and different barriers. But I just wondered, how do we assure a broad look in the development of all of these technologies?
I think maybe we can start with me, which is small for me, because that's thermal storage, right? When we develop, and thermal storage is a funny thing. I mean, Kilroy, when you fly into LAX, the AT&T buildings, we built those, and we built them in the early '80s. And there's thermal storage, great thermal storage plant there, and that technology is like awesome. It's been around since like like literally that's what caves are, right? So before there were buildings, there was thermal storage. And we continue to do it, but like on my recent development project, I was like, guys, can we do thermal storage here? And I was like, oh yeah, forgot about that. Like it's such a good idea that people forget about it. I think that's going to come from, even though it's a great idea, but it's not the new shiny thing. So I think sadly we have to re-educate both our engineers and our architects and our real estate folks about the old stuff that works really well still, in addition to the new shiny stuff. Because thermal storage and batteries are, to me, I mean, the batteries are shaping my peak, and then the thermal storage is doing its giant sort of stuff at night. I mean, they work in together, but it's easy to forget about the old stuff.
But if I can talk from a developer point of view, we look at all the technologies, and we're technology agnostic, as you well know, John. And if there is a new technology coming on and provides a better value proposition at comparable quality, and since you need to finance it over, and you want to have an economic lifetime of 30 or 35 years, then we're the first to jump on it, and so are other developers. So I think, at least on the utility scale side, everybody tries to get an unfair advantage. And I think the reason why we're having PV is because it just has a very strong value proposition. We have looked at a lot of batteries, from flywheel to compressed air to many flow batteries, because we thought that might have a fair shot. But at the end, you need to step back and you need to look at the LCOE and LCOS. And that, in our mind, is for us the guideline. Since if you want to deploy and if you want to decarbonize electricity generation and transportation, you only move the needle if you deploy it at the lowest cost. And be sure that either us or some of our competitors will pull the first most or the next promising technology if there is one. But at this point, I think it's PV and storage. And storage means at this point lithium ion, it's wind and the same. And every other technology I see more as an niche technology that you can use within certain limitations, but I don't think you move the needle with it.
And now, first of all, say I'm going to give us a pass because the title of the panel is Solar Plus Storage. So I would have talked about something else if that was what the title was. But building up on Martin's point, I think what we need to continue to do, again, is send the signal of what are the technology attributes that we want, and make sure that they're open to every technology that can be. And it's important to reiterate that commitment to technology, being a technology agnostic, because we'll say that, but then sometimes by the design of, again, what we've asked for, we've limited it. I will say this question is something that I've thought about and had some concern about, because we've struggled with our lack of diversity at times on our generation side. And so in our early procurements for energy storage, although other projects came in, like a flywheel project and some other ones, they, for the most part, dropped out, ended up not being able to be executed. But I think what's different, I'll highlight about lithium, so I do want to see other technologies come forward, which is why we do stagger our solicitations to be every 2 years, with the idea, again, that there might be technologies that are being supported by research now that might be able to be cost competitive in the future. Again, what makes me a little less concerned about lithium-ion batteries right now is that, number one, you want that diversity because you can be concerned about the profile and the technology, but it's not an emerging technology. It's emerging for the application here, but lithium-ion batteries have been around for decades. And so there's some more confidence, I would say, even compared to solar PV in terms of that as a product. And then second, the costs are really being driven by the transportation market, right? And so it's not as if we wouldn't see lithium-ion succeeding so well without that market. And so it's really about, does that market employ a different type of battery? And if so, what is that? But I do think we need to be vigilant of what are the consequences of not having that diversity. And also, if you don't have the technology diversity, is there enough supplier diversity is an important issue.
Good point. So I think we have time for just one more question. If everybody promises to be very brief, we're going to hand it to a student from UCLA. Buckle your chin straps.
My battery's down to 40%, so.
It's a good point. You're up.
Regarding the finance side, I wanted to ask, since a lot of large pension funds and institutional investors that control trillions of dollars have recently announced that they're divesting out of oil and gas and carbon producers, like how has the industry placed itself in a position to really use that opportunity to leverage large amounts of money coming into renewables.
Can you be brief about that? Anybody?
I'll take that. I think there is more money chasing projects than there are projects around. If you talk with large institutional investors, then they would say, you know, we have money that we want to put to work. It's obvious at this point there's a 20-year investment in a renewable energy project that is solid is a much better investment than a fossil fuel project. I think there are about $67 trillion of institutional money in North America and Western Europe, so that's a lot of money. A large majority of that is, or a significant majority or significant portion, of that is deployed still in fossil fuel, and as you see that divesting, I think they're chasing even more projects, and that will continue to drive the conversion in not just US, but you know, a lot of the conversion in renewables is happening outside of TS, and at a very fast pace.
One quick point, Drew. We haven't talked about it too much in this panel, but it's been in others. And that is, you can say solar plus storage, but there's a key necessary ingredient, and that is software or Internet of Things. That is just absolutely exciting. We can't do it without the kind of megabits meet megawatts, certainly at utility scale, but even on a smaller scale in a car, an electric car or hybrid electric car. So that's another thing to really, really watch as the presence of sensors, the presence of control systems, their bandwidth go ever increasing in the right direction. That's going to enable so much solar plus storage, as well as all of the other technologies that have been mentioned.
Yeah, I'll also say sort of on a dumb problems point, like my solar deals are old enough that it was kind of like pre-solar and storage, and so I just put up my solar. And now that that's happened, I can't go back and co-locate storage there because the rate that you end up on to make your solar deal pencil then makes a battery non-financially viable. And so the physics of solar plus storage make all the sense in the world, but unless you've done your deal integrated, you can't fix it later, which is a bummer. So and so it's something really to keep in mind, is that there are rate tariff barriers to solving some of this as well.
Good point. Well, if you guys could join me in thanking the panel. Thank you very much.